My name is Ilara. I am 35 years old, and for the last 10 years, my world has been spun from the delicate threads of stories and the soft wash of watercolor. I am a children's book author and illustrator, a vocation that grew from a seed of childhood wonder into the quiet, branching tree that now shelters my life. From my small studio, a sun-drenched room overlooking the rain-kissed gardens of Oakhaven, I craft tales of curious foxes and brave little stars. It is a gentle living, one that has allowed me to be present for my own two children, Leo and Luna, as they've grown. My husband, Julian, is 4 years my senior. We met not in the bloom of youth, but in its echo, at a college reunion. He was magnetic, his ambition a bright, hard flame that was impossible to ignore. He spoke of markets and mergers with a passion I reserved for narrative arcs and color palettes. We were an unlikely pairing, the dreamer and the pragmatist, but we found a strange harmony in our differences. He worked in the high-pressure world of investment banking at Sterling Vance Capital, a tower of glass and steel that scraped the Oakhaven sky. It was a demanding career, one that he, following in his own father's footsteps, pursued with a relentless, all-consuming focus. Julian's parents, Arthur and Beatrice, are in their 70s, still sharp and active, and their presence in our lives has often felt less like a gentle support and more like a steady, eroding force. They orbit Julian, seeing his world of finance as the sun around which all lesser planets, including my own small, creative sphere, must turn. "It's lovely that you have your little hobbies, dear," Beatrice once said, patting my hand while glancing at my drafting table, covered in sketches. The words, meant to be kind, landed like stones. To them, my work, the very thing that fed my soul and contributed significantly to our household, was not real work. It lacked the gravity and importance of Julian's. This dismissiveness extended, more dangerously, to our daughter, Luna. She was born with a severe, life-threatening allergy to nuts. It is a constant, humming anxiety in the background of our lives, a world of careful label reading and vigilant questioning. To Arthur and Beatrice, however, it has always been a simple failure of will, a bit of childhood fussiness. In our day, children weren't allergic to food, Arthur would proclaim, as if his pronouncement could rewrite her biology. They once tried to give her a slice of almond torte at a family gathering, waving away my panicked intervention with, "A little bit won't hurt her. It will build up her tolerance." That day, I saw with chilling clarity that their ignorance was not benign, it was a loaded weapon. The incident, coupled with Julian's increasingly distant and caustic behavior, had left a fine latticework of cracks in the foundation of our family, and I found myself, more and more, contemplating a future built on safer, more solid ground. As I readied myself for a quiet weekend alone, my husband was bustling about in preparation for what he declared was a business trip. He was a whirlwind of frantic energy, his movements sharp and impatient. His voice, when he finally addressed me, was like the crack of a whip. "I'm going on a business trip, Ilara. Don't you dare call me for anything trivial." His departures were frequent, a familiar rhythm in the cadence of our life together, but this time his demeanor was laced with an unfamiliar harshness, a brittle edge that set my teeth on edge. I tried to offer a placating smile, to assure him that I understood his need for focus. "Of course, Julian. I'll only reach out if it's a true emergency." My words, meant to soothe, seemed only to ignite his irritation. "An emergency," he scoffed, turning from the suitcase he was aggressively zipping shut. "What constitutes an emergency to you, Ilara? A misplaced paintbrush? A story that won't write itself?" It was no surprise, really. His so-called business trip was a fiction we had both, for a time, tacitly agreed to maintain. I knew, with the quiet certainty of a woman who has learned to read the silences in her own home, that he was not meeting with clients. He was meeting his mistress. His threats, born of a desperate need to protect his secret world, grew more absurd by the moment. "If you keep being a nuisance, I swear I'll claim emotional distress and sue you for every penny you've ever made from those silly little books," he exclaimed, his face flushed. The Julian I had married, the man who once marveled at my drawings and listened to my stories, had vanished. In his place stood a stranger, a man hollowed out by his own selfishness, his empathy eroded to nothing. He seemed utterly oblivious to the fragility of our own family, to the fact that our daughter, Luna, was still recovering from a persistent cough. His focus narrowed solely to his own desires. I remained silent, a practice I had perfected over the years. My silence was not submission, it was a shield, a quiet space I carved out to protect myself and our children from the shrapnel of his growing hostility. On the day he left, I was in my studio, cleaning the ink from my fountain pens, when a news alert flashed across my computer screen. A severe multi-car pileup on the interstate heading north, caused by a sudden, freak hailstorm. It was the very route he would have been taking. For a moment, my heart stuttered. But then, I remembered his stern, final warning, his face a mask of cold fury. I made a choice. I walked over to my phone, which lay charging on the desk, and with a steady hand, I switched it off. His fate, I decided in that quiet, sunlit room, was no longer my emergency. I allowed myself a small, tremulous smile. There was a secret he didn't know, one that had been slowly, painfully unfurling within me. A secret that would, I knew, change everything. Turning off my phone felt like taking a deep, cleansing breath after being underwater for too long. The silence it offered was a balm, a brief respite from the turmoil that had become the backdrop of my life. The most acute source of that turmoil was the chasm of misunderstanding surrounding Luna's allergy. Despite countless conversations, detailed explanations, and even a tense meeting with her allergist, conveying the mortal danger of her condition to Julian's parents felt like trying to explain the color blue to someone who had only ever seen in shades of gray. "It's all in her head," Beatrice would insist, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "A bit of positive thinking is what the child needs." Arthur, a man who believed willpower could conquer any ailment, would add, "You're coddling her, Ilara. If you just exposed her to it gradually, she'd get over it. No one really dies from allergies these days." It was like speaking to a brick wall, a wall that believed itself to be an authority on modern medicine. Because of this, I had a strict, unspoken rule: Luna was never to be left alone with them. Ever. But as Julian's distance grew, so did his parents' boldness. They began to drop by unannounced, often when they knew I was out running errands or at a meeting with my publisher, their visits framed as spontaneous acts of grandparental love. Each time, I would return to a knot of fear in my stomach, my relief at finding Luna safe quickly replaced by a simmering anger. I pleaded with Julian to intervene, to set a simple boundary. "Just ask them to call first, Julian. That's all." He would sigh, running a hand through his hair, the gesture a clear signal of his exhaustion and unwillingness to engage. "Ilara, they're my parents. They're from a different generation. They raised two healthy boys. I think we can trust their judgment." He was often bone-weary from the relentless demands of his job, and our home had become less a sanctuary and more a place where he offloaded the stress he couldn't show at the office. I, and by extension, our family's problems, became the most convenient outlet. His understanding of Luna's allergy was cursory at best, and he often used my caution as a weapon against me, another example of my supposed over-anxiousness. In this fraught environment, our son, Leo, had become an invaluable, if unwilling, ally. At 15, he possessed a quiet maturity that belied his years. He had become Luna's shadow, her protector. I'd find him in the pantry, squinting at the fine print on a box of crackers, or gently steering his sister away from a potluck table at a school event. He loved his sister fiercely, and with each passing year, his resentment toward his father and grandparents grew, a silent, bitter current running beneath the surface of our family life. One particularly trying Tuesday, after Julian had left for work before the sun was up, he called me. His tone was brisk, businesslike. "Listen, Mom's bridge club is meeting at her house this afternoon, but she's running late from a doctor's appointment. She's in a panic. I need you to go over there and give the place a quick clean before her friends arrive." I looked at my desk, at the storyboard for a new book that was due by the end of the week, the deadline highlighted in bright red on my calendar. "Julian, I can't. I have a deadline. A deadline, he scoffed, the sound crackling over the phone. For what, another story about a talking squirrel? Ilara, this is important. It's for my mother. He dismissed my work as if it were a child's game, a triviality that could be swept aside at his convenience. Just do it. It shouldn't take you long. Reluctantly, seething with a quiet fury, I packed up my laptop and drove to his parents' house. The familiar scent of potpourri and old resentments greeted me at the door. As I was dusting the mantelpiece, a collection of silver-framed photographs chronicling Julian's achievements, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Mrs. Vance, a hesitant female voice asked. This is Margaret from Sterling Vance. I'm Julian's assistant. I'm so sorry to bother you at home. It's no problem, Margaret. Is everything all right? Oh, yes, fine. It's just. Mr. Vance Sr. was in a meeting here earlier and he seems to have left a rather important file folder at home. Julian mentioned you were at the house, and he asked me to call you. He said he didn't want to bother you himself, as you were busy. Her voice was kind, apologetic. I recognized her as the woman who had helped me with some paperwork during our wedding planning, a beacon of calm in a sea of stress. Of course, I said, spotting a blue folder on the hall table. I have it right here. I can bring it by the office. Oh, would you? That would be a lifesaver. I didn't want to call Julian directly about it. You know how he is about interruptions. I did know. His pride was a fortress, and he viewed any sign of forgetfulness or disorganization as a crack in its walls. I gathered the file and drove downtown, the polished towers of the financial district glinting in the afternoon sun. When I handed the file to Margaret at the reception desk, she gave me a warm, grateful smile. Thank you again, Ilara. You've really saved the day. Then, her expression softened with sympathy. I hope things get easier for you all soon. It must be so difficult, with Julian having to take so much time off to care for Luna. The words hung in the air between us, confusing and alien. Time off? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. To care for Luna? Margaret's face fell, a look of dawning horror spreading across her features. She realized her mistake. Oh, my. I thought, he's been using his family leave days. He said Luna's condition had worsened and she required special appointments and at-home care. I stood frozen in the cavernous, marble-floored lobby, the hum of the city outside fading to a dull roar in my ears. He had been claiming time off work, compassionate leave, under the pretense of caring for our sick daughter. The deceit was staggering, a lie so audacious and cruel that I could barely process it. He was not just cheating on me, he was exploiting our child's vulnerability, her very real struggle, as a cover for his own sordid games. As I drove home, the city lights blurring through a film of unshed tears, the extent of the deception settled over me like a shroud. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a calculated betrayal that ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. This incident was the final, clarifying moment. My resolve, which had been slowly hardening for months, now solidified into something unbreakable. I had to protect my children, not just from careless grandparents, but from the callous duplicity of their own father. That evening, as darkness fell and the children slept soundly in their beds, I curled up on the sofa, the television a flickering, soundless companion. Julian returned late, as he always did, his arrival announced by the sharp click of the front door. He found me in the living room and his face, already etched with fatigue, tightened into a mask of annoyance. You didn't clean my parents' house today, he said, his voice flat. He clicked his tongue in irritation. Mom called to complain. Her friends arrived to a dusty living room. I was taken aback. In the chaotic aftermath of my discovery at his office, the task had completely evaporated from my mind. I forgot, I stammered. I went to the house, but then I had to run that file to your father's office. His expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable with confusion, then a hasty attempt to mask it. His sudden stillness, the way he avoided my gaze, sent a fresh wave of suspicion through me. "Who asked you to go to the company?" he asked, a subtle tremor of fear beneath the surface of his question. He thought he was safe, protected by the lie of a day off. Choosing to keep my newfound knowledge to myself, a small, sharp weapon held in reserve, I played along. "I'm not sure. Margaret, I think. I just delivered the documents and then the cleaning completely slipped my mind." I feigned a weary sigh, hoping to de-escalate the tension. "Just apologize to Mom tomorrow," he said, his relief almost palpable. He turned to go, his posture still rigid and guarded. "I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed." His actions were no longer just suspicious, they were a blaring siren, a clear and undeniable signal that he was hiding something monumental. After a long, restless night, a grim certainty took root in my mind. Julian was having an affair. The cold, calculated way he was exploiting Luna's illness as a shield for his deceit was unforgivable. Luna's life was already a landscape of challenges. Her severe allergies made school events, birthday parties, and even simple playdates a source of anxiety. We had surrounded her with a fortress of love and support, yet her own father trivialized her struggle, even going so far as to claim her condition was psychological, all while using it as an alibi for his infidelity. An anger, clean and hot, burned through the fog of my sorrow. I could not let this stand. The next morning, I made a call that felt both terrifying and liberating. I hired a private investigator. It was a significant financial stretch. The income from my books was steady but not extravagant. But the cost of uncertainty, of living inside this web of lies, was far greater. Weeks later, a plain manila envelope arrived. The investigator's report was concise, clinical, and utterly devastating. It confirmed everything. Julian was having an affair. He frequently skipped work, using the family leave he'd fabricated, to spend afternoons with his mistress. She was a young woman in her 20s, with striking, dark features and an air of confident, almost defiant, beauty. The report contained photographs, Julian and this woman, Serafina, laughing over lunch on a sun-drenched patio, their hands entwined. Though I had expected it, the visual proof left me breathless. The foundation of our 15-year marriage didn't just crack, it disintegrated into dust. And in the space where I expected to find deep sorrow, I found only a cold, hard rage and a profound sense of revulsion. My path forward became starkly clear. I continued to work with the investigator, methodically collecting evidence. I met with a divorce attorney, a woman with kind eyes and a will of steel, and we began to map out the future: alimony, child support, sole custody. My thoughts were no longer entangled in the past I had shared with Julian. They were focused on building a new, safe future with my children. A few days later, Julian casually mentioned he'd be working over the weekend. "It's a new project out near Mount Serenity," he said, not meeting my eye. "I need to be on site for a preliminary survey. I'll be back Sunday evening." I knew this was a lie. A corporate restructuring 5 months prior had moved him to a desk-bound role. His travel for site visits had ended completely. He was planning a weekend getaway with Serafina. A cold calm settled over me. My resolve was firm. My path was clear. As he packed his overnight bag, I approached him in the bedroom. "Julian," I said, my voice even. "Luna's cough is lingering, and Leo is just getting over a cold. And my parents are on that Alaskan cruise, so they won't be around to help if anything happens." He whirled around, his face a mask of irritation. "For God's sake, Ilara, what did I tell you? Do not contact me over trivial matters. This is a critical work trip." His defensiveness was a confirmation in itself. After he stormed out of the room, I walked over to his desk. Tucked away in the back of a drawer was a leather travel wallet he rarely used. Inside, I found what I was looking for, a printout of a reservation. Not for a corporate hotel, but for a two-night stay at a place called the Whispering Pines Lodge, a luxurious, secluded and nestled deep in the mountains. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. A potent mix of anger and betrayal surged through me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of empowerment. I spent the rest of the evening not in tears, but online, browsing apartment rental sites. By midnight, I had scheduled 5 viewings for the upcoming weekend. I was no longer a victim of his betrayal, I was the architect of my own escape. When the weekend finally arrived, Julian slipped out of the house before dawn, his overnight bag slung over his shoulder. The quiet click of the door closing behind him was the sound of a chapter ending. After a simple breakfast with the kids, I set about my own tasks. I cleaned the house with a focused energy, preparing it not for his return, but for our departure. I'm going to look at some places this afternoon, I told Leo, who was lounging on the couch, a book in his lap. Keep an eye on Luna for me? He looked up, his gaze knowing and serious. Sure, Mom. I planned to sit down with both of them that evening, to explain the divorce, the new apartment, the future. I didn't expect them to be shocked. Their bond with their father had frayed to a single, tenuous thread, worn thin by years of his emotional absence and his careless disregard for Luna's well-being. By Saturday evening, I had found it. A bright, airy apartment in a neighborhood called Riverbend, with a large bay window perfect for a new, smaller studio. I decided to sleep on it, to be certain. The next morning, I returned to the real estate office, my heart light with a sense of hopeful purpose. I signed the lease and paid the deposit and first month's rent. The cost, on top of the investigator and the legal fees, was daunting, but I saw it not as an expense, but as an investment in a new, honest life. I was walking out of the office, my mind filled with thoughts of Julian, perhaps at that very moment enjoying a hike with his mistress, when my phone rang. It was Leo, his voice tight with panic. Mom. It's Luna. She collapsed. We're in an ambulance. The world tilted on its axis. The cheerful Sunday morning streetscape blurred. In the background of the call, I could hear the terrifying, rising wail of a siren. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the phone. Leo, his voice cracking, passed the phone to a paramedic. Ma'am, your daughter is experiencing anaphylactic shock. We're en route to Oak Haven General. My mind raced. How? How could this have happened? I had purged the house of every trace of nuts. I had prepared all of her meals myself. Overwhelmed by a tidal wave of fear and confusion, I fumbled for my car keys, my body moving on autopilot. I got into the driver's seat, but my hands were shaking too much to even start the engine. In a moment of sheer desperation, I dialed Julian's number. This was it. This was the genuine, life-or-death emergency. He should answer. He had to answer. It rang and rang, finally going to his voicemail. I tried again. And again. The line remained stubbornly silent. His earlier words, "Don't call me for anything trivial," echoed in my ears, a cruel, bitter irony. The act of trying to reach him, of being met with that deliberate silence, had a strange, clarifying effect. A cold fury cut through my panic. I stopped calling. His absence was no longer a void, it was a decision. I took a deep, shuddering breath, gripped the steering wheel, and drove. When I arrived at the hospital, I found Leo pacing in the stark, white hallway outside the emergency room. He looked so small and so old at the same time. I rushed to the attending physician, my voice shaking. My daughter, Luna Vance, is she? Please calm down, Mrs. Vance, the doctor said, her voice gentle but firm. Luna is stable now. Her blood pressure dropped dangerously low, but we've administered epinephrine and she's resting. We got to her just in time. A wave of relief so profound it buckled my knees washed over me. Tears I hadn't realized I was holding back streamed down my face. We had been so close to the edge of an unthinkable tragedy. Your son is a hero, the doctor added, nodding toward Leo. His quick thinking, calling 911 immediately, saved his sister's life. I pulled Leo into a fierce hug, my heart swelling with a painful, desperate pride. He had been the parent in that moment. He had protected his sister when no one else could. After a few moments, I knew I needed to go home to get Luna's insurance card and overnight things. As I was gathering her paperwork from the file cabinet, I saw Julian's insurance card still tucked in its sleeve. If he had planned an overnight trip, a real one, he surely would have taken it. There was no time to dwell on it. I hurried back to the hospital. As Leo and I were at the admissions desk, filling out the mountain of paperwork, he nudged my arm and pointed to the large television screen mounted in the lobby, which was tuned to a local news channel. A reporter was standing on a winding mountain road, a familiar-looking landscape of pine trees behind her. The headline read, "Single car accident on Mount Serenity Pass." The camera panned to the wreckage. A dark sedan, its front end crumpled against a large oak tree, the rear miraculously intact. The license plate was clearly visible. I recognized it instantly. The driver, a man, and a female passenger have been transported to a nearby hospital, the reporter said. Their injuries are reported to be non-life-threatening. The confirmation of his infidelity, so public and stark, was a final, painful blow. Leo, old enough to connect all the terrible dots, said nothing, his face pale and set. A deep, burning shame washed over me, shame for having allowed things to get to this point, for letting the poison of my marriage seep into my children's lives, burdening them with worries that should never have been theirs to carry. Just then, my phone, which I had turned back on, began to ring. It was Julian. I stared at the screen, at his name flashing insistently. His earlier dismissal, his angry command for silence, felt like a lifetime ago. Now, in his moment of need, he was desperate for my attention. I let it ring. And ring. Then, with a quiet finality, I pressed the ignore button. It wasn't uncommon, after all, to turn off one's phone in a hospital. After we finished the paperwork, Leo and I drove home, the silence in the car thick with everything we had seen. As we pulled into our driveway, my heart sank. Parked at the curb were Arthur and Beatrice. They stood on our front porch, their postures rigid with impatience and anxiety. Exhausted from the emotional whiplash of the day, I knew this was not a social call. I braced myself for another confrontation. I left Leo in the car and walked towards them, my steps heavy. "Ilara. There you are," Beatrice cried, her voice sharp with a frantic energy. "Where have you been? We've been trying to contact you for hours." I looked at them, at their worried faces, and felt a profound, chilling disconnect. Their emergency was not my emergency. Not anymore. I had my phone off, I said calmly. "We were at the hospital." "The hospital?" Arthur blustered. "You should have been answering your phone. Julian has been in a serious car accident. He's in surgery right now, he'll be hospitalized for weeks." I met their frantic gazes with a stillness that seemed to unnerve them. "Is that so?" I replied, my voice devoid of the panic they expected. My apparent indifference infuriated Beatrice. "How can you be so composed?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Your husband is in a grave state. Don't you care about him at all?" Her words, intended to shame me, instead struck a match to the kindling of my long-suppressed anger. This was it. The final straw. "There was another emergency today," I said, my voice low and steady. "Luna was rushed to the hospital. She went into anaphylactic shock. She almost died." I watched their faces, saw the flicker of something, not guilt, but a shared, nervous defensiveness. They both had the same tell, a quick, subconscious scratch at the back of the neck. I pulled a crumpled paper bag from my purse. "The evidence. You came by the house earlier, didn't you?" I asked. They exchanged a look. "We were on our way back from the coast," Arthur explained, his tone suddenly cautious. "Our usual hotel was booked, so we came home a day early. We just stopped by to drop off a little souvenir. Some rice crackers for the children. He explained that he had given them to Leo, who, seeing the familiar brand, had thought nothing of it and left his sister with the snack while he went to his room. It was in the living room, alone, that Luna had begun to react. I opened the bag and pulled out the cracker box. At the hospital, I said, my voice trembling with rage, I found this in the trash. The box contains 3 individually wrapped sleeves. 2 are the plain salted crackers Luna can eat. The third, a new flavor, is shrimp and almond. The allergen isn't listed on the front of the box, only in the fine print on the back. I looked them dead in the eye. Did you know? Did you intentionally give her the one with almonds and then hide the packaging, hoping to prove your ridiculous, dangerous theory that it's all in her head? Beatrice scoffed. Don't be so dramatic. It was an honest mistake. A mistake that nearly killed my daughter. I cried, my voice finally breaking. Knowingly giving a person with a deadly allergy their allergen isn't a mistake. It's assault. This is ridiculous. Arthur blustered, trying to regain control. We were doing you a favor, trying to toughen her up. I couldn't forgive them. Not for the years of dismissiveness, and certainly not for this. They had gambled with my daughter's life to prove a point. In their desperation, they tried to pivot back to their own crisis. Now is not the time for this. Beatrice pleaded. We came to tell you about Julian's accident. Don't you even care? But I was done caring. He was on his way to a romantic getaway with his mistress, I said flatly. He used our daughter's illness, the same illness you dismiss, as an excuse to take time off work to be with her. I reached into my purse again and pulled out the thick file from the private investigator. I laid a few of the photographs on the porch railing, Julian and Serafina, smiling, intimate. They stared, speechless, their faces slack with shock. I'm divorcing him, I declared, my voice ringing with a newfound clarity and strength. And I'm pursuing legal action against you both for reckless endangerment. As the words left my lips, the wail of a siren, different from the one that had haunted me just hours before, grew louder. A police car, its blue and red lights flashing, screeched to a halt at the curb. Leo had called them on our drive home. A moment later, 2 officers were walking up the path, their expressions grim. They asked Arthur and Beatrice to accompany them to the station to answer some questions regarding an allegation of assault. Their blustering protests faded as the officers calmly but firmly escorted them to the patrol car. A week passed, a strange, quiet interlude in the storm. Luna was home and recovering, her laughter slowly returning to fill the house. Leo was my stoic shadow, a constant, reassuring presence. Then, a call from an unfamiliar number. It was the hospital where Julian was a patient. Despite our estrangement, I was still listed as his emergency contact. Mrs. Vance, I apologize for the intrusion, a weary-sounding nurse explained. But Mr. Vance is insistent that we reach out to you. Reluctantly, more to spare the hospital staff further harassment than for any concern for Julian, I went. He was in a private room, his leg in a cast, his face bruised and sullen. Finally, he snapped the moment he saw me. You neglectful wife. I've been calling and calling. Where have you been? I had, of course, ignored every one of his 37 calls. The past week had been a whirlwind of finalizing the new apartment, packing boxes, and meeting with my attorney. Leo and Luna, when I had finally told them everything, had met the news not with tears, but with a quiet, profound relief. You requested privacy, Julian, I replied calmly, feigning an ignorance I knew would infuriate him. I assumed you were busy. Busy? I've been in hell, he roared. And you took my credit card. My insurance card. I'm being discharged today, and I can't pay my bill. Go down to the front desk and settle it. I didn't bring your insurance card, I said, my voice even. Perhaps you should ask your parents for help. My parents, he shouted, his voice echoing in the small room. How can I? They're in jail because of you. This past week has been a nightmare. I'm thinking of suing you for emotional distress. I had reached my limit. The last vestiges of pity or shared history evaporated. Actually, Julian, I said, pulling a sheaf of papers from my bag, I'll be the one filing for alimony and child support. And don't act as if you don't know why. I know exactly what you've been doing. I spread the investigator's report on his bedside table. As he absorbed the photographs, the dates, the times, his blustering rage crumbled, replaced by a pasty, slack-jawed panic. I can't afford this, he stammered. You've barely worked for the past 6 months, using Luna as your excuse, I stated firmly. You'll just have to find the funds. At that moment, the door to the room opened. A young woman with long, dark hair and an unervingly confident gaze stepped inside. It was her. Serafina. Julian and I both stared, speechless. You must be Alara, she said, her voice smooth as silk. She looked at me, not with malice, but with a frank, appraising intensity. Well, now that it's all out in the open, I might as well tell you. I was the one with Julian on that trip. I remained silent. She turned to Julian, her expression softening. I'm so sorry you were hurt, my love. Then she looked back at me. He told me he was planning to divorce you. He was just waiting for the right time. She confessed her love for him, her desire to build a life with him. She then made an astonishing offer. She told Julian that she would handle everything. All of it. The divorce settlement, the alimony, the child support. You won't have to worry about a thing, she cooed, taking his hand. You can be with me. I'm younger, I don't have all this baggage. We can be happy. Julian, overwhelmed and cornered, saw the lifeline she was throwing him. A new life, a beautiful woman, and a clean slate from his financial and familial disaster. It was an irresistible offer. You, he said to her, his voice thick with emotion, you are my true partner. They embraced, sealing their new pact. I couldn't help it. A small, dry laugh escaped my lips. They looked at me, confused. They had no idea of the complication that awaited them, a detail my investigator had uncovered in his final report. Serafina was not just a wealthy young woman. She was the beloved, and only, granddaughter of Niccolo Moretti, the reputed head of the Moretti crime family. As if on cue, 2 large men in impeccably tailored dark suits entered the room, their presence filling the space with an unspoken menace. They flanked Serafina, their eyes on Julian. His face went from relief to ashen as the reality of his new situation dawned on him. He wasn't just marrying a woman, he was marrying into a family from which there was no escape. Good luck to you both, I said, my smile genuine for the first time in years. I turned and walked out, leaving him to his new, gilded cage. Within a month, my divorce was finalized. True to her word, Serafina's family attorneys ensured every penny of the settlement was paid promptly. Julian, enmeshed in a web of debts and obligations to his new family, was forced to quit his job at Sterling Vance and began working in one of his father-in-law's import-export businesses. His parents, facing their own legal battles and public disgrace, became social pariahs. Meanwhile, my children and I embraced our new beginning. We moved into the sunlit apartment in Riverbend. My little business, born of quiet passion, began to flourish in unexpected ways. Luna, free from the constant, low-grade stress of her old life, thrived. Her health improved, and her laughter became the new soundtrack of our home. As we planned a celebratory vacation, a trip to the coast to watch the whales, I looked at my children, at the peaceful, happy life we were building from the ashes of the old one, and I felt a profound, quiet joy. I had learned that self-respect is a home you build for yourself, that boundaries are the fences that keep it safe, and that sometimes, the most inspiring story you can ever tell is the one where you become your own hero.